Hi everyone, this is the next video following the measurements of macro performance. What we're now going to be looking at is something that we call demand side policies. So we're looking here at different things that we can do to influence the level of aggregate demand across the economy. So remember, the formula for aggregate demand is measured by C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So the total output of the economy can be measured through aggregate demand. This is measured by consumption, spending by households on domestic goods and services, investment, which is spending by firms on capital goods, spending by the government, which could be things like current and capital expenditure and transfer payments, X, which is exports, foreign demand for our goods and services, and then finally we take away the imports. So the foreign output within our economy that people are buying, but that wasn't made by our citizens. So what we're trying to do through demand side policies is to influence the level of aggregate demand. Now I'm going to come back to this word fiscal policy in a moment or two. I just want to take you to these two different diagrams here. Now what I've given you here is a Keynesian long-run aggregate supply curve. So look at this diagram first of all. What Keynes says is that in the long run, any output is possible. The economy could achieve the potential, which is the vertical part of the LRAS curve, but there is no guarantee we will get to that position on the LRAS curve. So you've got to think about it like this. Sometimes we have situations where output is too low. So look at this diagram here. If that's the actual output, so Y1, the gap between Y1 and YFO is measuring the spare capacity in the economy. So what you've got in this diagram here is the risk that GDP is significantly below the potential, and that spare capacity will mean that you're going to get high unemployment. So you've got lots of different factors of production that are not being used across the economy. So you could think about it as like a recession, if you like, or a negative output gap problem. Here, you could argue that aggregate demand is too high. The economy is working at least at potential, so you're going to get massive scarcity. You've got really high rates of employment. That's leading to higher wage rates, which sounds good, but you've also got higher price levels. So you're getting wage price spirals, inflation is getting too high, and that can cripple the economy going forward. So you could think about it like a negative output gap here and a positive output gap problem here. Now, demand side then, if we're in this position here, where inflation is too high, so we're running at these price levels here, we've got to somehow ease the inflationary pressures by bringing down aggregate demand. On the right hand side, what you want to do, you want to increase aggregate demand to try and create more growth and more employment across the economy. You do that by raising aggregate demand, which would reduce the level of spare capacity in the economy. Now, one tool available to any government across the world to achieve this is something that we call fiscal policy. And this is something that John Maynard Keynes was a big believer of, Keynesian economics. So Keynesian economics is this idea that what we should be using is demand side policies. So fiscal policy, everyone, is the use of government spending and taxes to influence the level of aggregate demand. Now remember, government spending is an injection into the circular flow. Taxes are a withdrawal from the circular flow. So if we wanted to create more jobs and boost aggregate demand, what we would recommend the government do is to follow what we call an expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy is where we would increase government spending and or reduce taxes in the economy. Now think about how this can help create higher rates of economic growth. Let's think about taxes first of all. If we were to do things such as lower income tax rates, it's going to be pushing up the disposable income that workers receive across the economy. And if people are earning additional incomes or marginal incomes, then people will start to buy more domestic goods and services. So that could push up consumption and therefore aggregate demand across the economy. If we were to give businesses tax breaks or lower taxes, then that could allow firms to make more profits, and they've also now got additional incomes that are being kept for them, and that can be used to fuel growth in investment across the economy as well. So the logic will be lower taxes will lead to more consumption and more investment, which would raise aggregate demand across the economy. You've got to think about it as well that the formula to work out the multiplier effect is 1 divided by the marginal propensity to withdraw. If we can reduce the withdrawals, we expand and increase multiplier effects, which should spur lots and lots of rounds of economic growth. Now we can also do this through lots of government spending. If the government, for example, were to spend billions of pounds on the NHS or schools, well, that's going to create growing demand for teachers and nurses and doctors, but also construction workers. And these workers have now got more money in their pockets, they can do more spending, and then this will trigger a big multiplier effect. So for example, if we use more government spending to expand Huddersfield Hospital, that could mean an extra 500 jobs. That's 500 extra people that are able to spend across Huddersfield. Well, that will lead to a growing demand for restaurants and cafes and bars, shops, etc. And that will spearhead more growth in aggregate demand across the economy. Now, what you might also want to do though is to not always use expansionary fiscal policy. You might want to use what we call deflationary or contractionary fiscal policy. Now, you will be looking to do this when you're in a period of high inflation, so high scarcity. So this time you want to ease the pressure on the economy. You've got to reduce aggregate demand. So when you want to reduce aggregate demand to bring down inflation, you would do the opposite of what you did here. You would cut government spending and or you would raise taxes. So if we were to raise income tax rates or business tax rates, you're reducing the ability of people to consume and invest. And that would ease aggregate demand across the economy. It would also reduce multiplier effects, which will hopefully again bring down aggregate demand. Now, of course, G is a key component of aggregate demand. If the government spend less, it means the government are demanding less output from the economy, and that will also ease aggregate demand. Now, just a bit of a complexity I want to pick up on with these Keynesian LRAS curves. It's the reason why it shapes as it does. When we're down here, we've got lots of spare capacity. So the logic would be that when you raise aggregate demand, you've still got lots of spare resources. So you haven't got scarcity issues at this point here. So that means you can boost aggregate demand without creating a massive growth in the rate of inflation. But look what happens. If we were to increase aggregate demand again, you now start to see the benefits in terms of the growth in output are quite low, but the impact on inflation is quite high. If we do it again, look at the impact. GDP barely increases, but we get a massive growth in the rate of inflation across the economy. So when you raise aggregate demand, when you've got big spare capacity, fiscal policy is more effective here than what it would be here to raise output and create jobs without creating lots of inflation. Same way here. If we can bring down aggregate demand, it's going to have a big reduction in the rate of inflation without having a significant impact on the drop in output. We're just getting the economy back towards a more manageable level. Right, two other words on here that I want to pick up on. When the government uses fiscal policy, or this demand side policy, remember, in a negative output gap, you want to raise aggregate demand, you would use expansionary fiscal policy. When you want to ease aggregate demand or bring it down to tackle high inflation, you would use deflationary or contractionary fiscal policy. So lower government spending and or higher taxes. Now sometimes this doesn't need any new policies. Let's say, for example, we're in a boom on the business cycle, we've got high inflation. we want to reduce government spending. Well, to a certain extent, we've got what we call an automatic stabiliser. When AD is high and inflation is very high, you've got high output. Well, that means you've got high employment levels, and because employment's so high, there's a fall in demand for job seekers allowance anyway. So government spending should automatically fall to tackle high inflation when you're in a positive output gap. Now also, because people are working more and earning more and buying more output, they're automatically paying more taxes anyway. So that will mean that more money is withdrawing from the economy automatically. So here, the government haven't had to create policies. The rules they've already got in place can be used to manage government spending and taxes to influence high inflation. Now, when you've got high unemployment, you want a boost to aggregate demand. Well, government spending could increase automatically. So when you've got high unemployment, you've got more people claiming benefits, and that will automatically mean that government spending will increase. Boris Johnson hasn't had to create a new policy for that to happen. But also, taxation will fall. Less spending because of low output means you've got less VAT, you've got falling profits, less corporate tax being paid, high unemployment means you've got less people paying income tax. So this will automatically happen. Now the trouble is though that, and we tend to focus on this from a recession, so this kind of period here, a negative output gap, sometimes automatic stabilisers are not sufficient. Here we have to use what we call discretionary fiscal policy. This is where the recession or the drop in output is that severe, it needs new government policy. So you've only got to look at the coronavirus at the moment. You've got businesses across the country, profits are falling, you've got big businesses threatening bankruptcy, unemployment starting to skyrocket. We need to boost aggregate demand, and the government have come up with lots and lots of new policies to increase government spending. So lots of emergency loans to businesses, agreeing to what we call furlough staff from businesses that don't need their workers temporarily, where the government will pay 80% of the wages. So the government are finding lots of new initiatives to increase government spending, and these have had to be achieved by new policies and new ideas from the government. The logic will be that when we move out of the coronavirus and the recession starts to go away, that government spending will start to fall again, and we will end the discretionary fiscal policies. Right, just a bit more I want to tell you about fiscal policy. As I said before, you can think about fiscal policy through the circular flow. If we want to tackle a negative output gap, we've got to make the circular flow get bigger. Now we can achieve that by increasing injections or reducing withdrawals. If we were, for example, to want to expand, we could increase government spending and or we could cut taxes. Both of these policies would lead to more money flowing around the circular flow. So if you reduce taxes and incomes grow, which means more people can spend, which creates more output, and then that can create a multiplier and create more jobs across the economy, which raises incomes even further. If this was too big and you've got high scarcity and inflation, you would lower government spending and or you would raise taxes. So for example, if the government were to come up with a new policy where they increase business taxes, it means firms are making less profits. It means they're going to invest less and demand fewer workers. That will cause unemployment, income starts to fall, which means spending by households falls and output starts to fall. So you've got there, everyone, what we call fiscal policy and demand side policies. Now, we do have some problems though when it comes to fiscal policy. Let's say, for example, we wanted to use expansionary fiscal policy and increase government spending or lower taxes. How effective that will be will depend on the size of the multiplier effect. So, for example, if we were to reduce income tax rates, that gives people a marginal income or additional income. Now, what we're hoping is people will then spend that money on consumption. If people are really worried about the future of their economy or worried about their job security, rather than spend their money, they might decide to save it instead. So if people are saving additional incomes rather than spending it, it would reduce the multiplier effect and reduce how successful that tax break was to influence economic performance. You've also got to think about the impact on government finances. If the government are increasing government spending and reducing taxes to tackle a recession, it's going to lead to lots and lots of government debt. Well, that debt will carry high interest rates. They've got to be repaid by not just people today, but people for the next 50 years. And it could also mean in the future, because we've had lots of debt, we've got to follow a policy, what we call fiscal austerity. This is where government spending will have to be cut in the future in order to start to pay down some of that debt. Well, that can affect the quality of healthcare, education in the future, which of course is really, really bad for future levels of living standards. Now, this is another problem we've got. It's very difficult to say exactly how the economy is performing. It's also very difficult to say exactly how people will respond to the changes in government spending and taxes. So say, for example, AD was too low, you've got a negative output gap. So what you want to do is to raise government spending and lower taxes. Well, the problem is we might overshoot. We might cut government taxes too low or raise government spending too much, and that could actually lead to AD increasing way beyond what we hoped for in the first place. Now, if that happens, then the problem we've now got is AD is too high, and you've got high inflation in the economy. And that kind of ties in what I said here. Will people behave as expected? Will giving tax breaks to people lead to more spending? Possibly not. Who knows? You've also got a time lag, especially when it comes to discretionary fiscal policy. Those new rules and changes to government spending and taxation have got to be approved by the government. We've got a democracy. It's got to be discussed. It's got to be debated. It's got to be agreed upon. Well, those will take a long time to pass into law, and that could mean that the benefits for the economy might take 6 months, a year to happen, and that time lag could mean that we're not going to get the desired effect for a year, 18 months down the line. You've also got bureaucracy. Now, this is the sheer amount of paperwork and different people that have got to agree to these different things before they come into law. And again, these things will create time lags and slow down that process of implementing fiscal policy. So guys, overall, fiscal policy is something that's being used massively at the moment, expansionary fiscal policy. So our government is building up massive debt levels by increasing government spending and cutting taxes to give the economy the boost that it needs. Of course, the problem will be in the future, all that debt that's been built up will have to be paid back by somebody, and that somebody, unfortunately, will be you guys. On that cheery note, everyone, that is the end of fiscal policy.